wasn't looking for anything fancy, just a small, quiet place where I could focus on writing my novel. But the building had an unsettling aura that I ignored at first. The landlord, an elderly man named Mr. Daniels, showed me the unit with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's a little older than you might be used to, but it has character," he said, brushing dust off a faded hallway carpet. The apartment itself was on the second floor. The building creaked with every step, and the walls were thin enough that I could hear conversations from the floor below. There was a faint smell of mildew in the air, a lingering scent that never fully went away, no matter how many times I cleaned. But it was cheap, and I needed somewhere to stay, so I signed the lease without thinking too much about it. The first week was normal. I unpacked, set up my laptop, and tried to get accustomed to the quiet. But soon, small things began to unsettle me. At night, I would hear footsteps pacing in the apartment below me. At first, I assumed it was a neighbor, but Mr. Daniels had said the unit had been vacant for over a year. I figured maybe a squatter had moved in without anyone noticing. Then I started noticing other oddities. Objects in my apartment would shift places on their own. My coffee mug might be on the counter when I went to bed, and on the floor when I woke up. At first, I blamed myself, thinking I had moved things and forgotten. But one night, I woke up to the sound of whispering. It was faint, barely audible, like someone speaking right next to my ear. I froze, listening. The whispers didn't form words I could understand, but there was a rhythm to them, a cadence that made my skin crawl. I tried to ignore it, thinking the stress of moving and the isolation were affecting my mind. But the sounds became more pronounced, more deliberate. I could hear shuffling and scratching in the walls, and sometimes soft tapping at my bedroom window. I started keeping a notebook, documenting every occurrence, hoping that by analyzing the pattern, I could make sense of it. But the more I wrote, the more I realized there was no pattern. It wasn't random, yet it didn't follow any logical sequence. About 2 weeks in, I set up a small camera in my living room, pointing toward the doorway and the hall. I figured if something, or someone, was moving around, I could catch it on tape. The first night, the footage showed nothing unusual. The second night, I thought I had captured something. But when I reviewed the recording frame by frame, the movement in the corner of the room seemed to vanish whenever I tried to focus on it. It was as if the entity, or person, knew I was watching. The next few nights brought more disturbances. One night, I woke to the sound of my bedroom door opening slowly. I sat up, my heart hammering, and turned on the lamp. The door was wide open, but nobody was there. On my floor, I saw scratches, deep enough to catch my fingernail. My apartment was small, and I had been the only one home. The scratches hadn't been there before. I called Mr. Daniels to ask about the unit below me. He sounded surprised. "I told you, that apartment has been empty for years," he said. "Nobody's supposed to be in there." I pressed him, but he insisted it was vacant. I even asked him if he had any previous tenants who might have left behind something. He hesitated. "There was one man," he said finally. "A tenant who, well, he disappeared. Nobody knows what happened to him." That piqued my interest, but it also made me uneasy. I did some research and found that the missing tenant had lived in that unit over a decade ago. His name was Henry Caldwell. According to the records, Henry moved in, paid his rent for a few months, and then vanished. There were rumors that he was obsessed with the occult, trying to communicate with spirits, but nothing was confirmed. The case was considered cold, and the apartment had remained empty since. I didn't sleep well after learning that. That night, I woke up to a presence in my room. At first, it felt like someone was standing behind me, close enough that I could feel the heat of their body. I didn't dare turn around. The whispers returned, louder this time, and I swear I could hear a voice calling my name. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but I was frozen, unable to move. Then, a shadow moved across the floor. It wasn't human in shape. It was tall, thin, and indistinct, but it had the unmistakable sense of malice. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, but the shadow vanished instantly, as if it had been swallowed by the darkness itself. The whispers continued, now circling the room, coming from every direction at once. I wrapped myself in the blankets, hoping it would pass. Morning never came as quickly as I wanted it to, and when it did, the room looked normal. Nothing had been disturbed, except for a faint smudge on my wall, like a handprint left in soot. The next night, I decided to confront it. I stood in my apartment, talking out loud. "I know you're here," I said. "I know what you want. Just leave me alone." The air grew cold, my breath visible in the beam of the lamp. Then, I saw it. Henry Caldwell, or what had become of him. His form was half shrouded in shadows, his face pale and hollow, eyes dark voids, staring straight at me. I ran to the door, but it slammed shut before I could reach it. The whispers turned into screams, unintelligible, furious, and the room itself seemed to stretch, walls bending unnaturally. Objects flew across the room, books, dishes, even a chair that hit the wall with a loud crash. I barely escaped to the hallway, my heart racing, my body trembling. I spent the next few days at a friend's apartment, too terrified to return. When I finally went back, the apartment seemed normal. No scratches, no shadows, no whispers. I thought maybe it had been a hallucination, a stress-induced nightmare. But then I noticed something in the mirror, a faint silhouette standing behind me, motionless, watching. I packed my things and left that same day. I called Mr. Daniels to tell him I was moving out, and he sounded almost relieved. "I wasn't sure you'd last," he said. "Most people don't." I asked him what he meant, but he only shook his head. "Some tenants, they just don't survive the building, or the tenant below." I didn't return for my deposit. I didn't care. I moved across the country, trying to put it behind me. But sometimes, at night, I hear the whispering again. I wake up to faint scratches on the floor, or my keys misplaced in impossible locations. And sometimes, just out of the corner of my eye, I see a shadow watching me, a tall, thin figure that should not exist. Henry Caldwell never left Crestwood Lane. I don't think he ever will. I took the job because it paid more than anything else I could find on short notice. Red Mile Storage was on the outskirts of town, surrounded by empty lots and a stretch of road that barely saw traffic after sunset. It was one of those places people only thought about when they needed to hide something away and forget about it. Rows of metal storage units, all identical, all silent. The job was simple. Night security. Sit in the office, watch the cameras, do a walkthrough once every 2 hours, and make sure nobody broke in. The manager, a tired-looking guy named Paul, handed me the keys on my first night and gave me one rule that stood out. "Unit 47, he said, pointing to the far end of the property on the map. "Don't open it. Ever. If you hear anything from it, ignore it." I laughed, thinking he was joking, but he didn't smile. "I'm serious," he added. "Just leave it alone." That should have been enough to make me quit right there, but I needed the money, so I nodded and didn't ask questions. The first few nights were quiet. Too quiet, honestly. I would sit in the small office, staring at grainy black and white camera feeds, sipping bad coffee, and trying not to fall asleep. Every couple of hours, I'd grab the flashlight and walk the perimeter. The metal doors would rattle slightly in the wind, and the gravel would crunch under my boots. Nothing unusual. Until the 5th night. It started during my second walkthrough, around 2:10 a.m. I was making my way down the last row, the one where Unit 47 was located. I hadn't paid it much attention before, but that night I noticed something. The door wasn't fully shut. It was just slightly open, maybe an inch or two, enough to create a thin line of darkness inside. I stopped a few feet away, staring at it. I was sure it had been closed earlier. I told myself someone must have come by earlier and not locked it properly. It happens. People get careless. I approached slowly, shining my flashlight toward the gap. The beam didn't reach far inside. It just kind of disappeared into the darkness. That's when I heard it. A soft, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across concrete. I froze. The sound came from inside the unit. Slow, deliberate. I stepped back immediately. Paul's warning replayed in my head. Don't open it. If you hear anything, ignore it. So that's what I did. I backed away, finished the rest of my walkthrough quickly, and returned to the office. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe something shifted inside. Maybe a rat. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had moved on purpose. When I checked the camera feed for that row, my stomach dropped. Unit 47's door was completely closed. Not slightly open like I had just seen. Completely shut. Locked. I replayed the footage, scrubbing back to when I had been standing there. The camera showed me stopping in front of the unit, shining my flashlight, then stepping back and walking away. But the door never opened, not even a crack. I stared at the screen for a long time, trying to make sense of it. I knew what I saw. I knew what I heard. But the camera showed something different. That was the first time I thought about quitting. But I didn't. The next night, I avoided that row entirely during my first walkthrough. I stuck to the main paths, telling myself I was just being paranoid. Everything was normal. The cameras showed nothing unusual. No movement, no open doors. Around 3 a.m., I finally forced myself to check the far row again. I couldn't just ignore part of the property. As I got closer, I noticed something immediately. Unit 47's door was open again, wider this time, maybe a foot. And the darkness inside looked wrong. It wasn't just the absence of light. It looked thicker, like it had depth, like it was swallowing the beam of my flashlight instead of reflecting it. I didn't move any closer. Then I heard breathing. Slow, wet, uneven, coming from inside the unit. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I took another step back, then another, not taking my eyes off the opening. The breathing got louder. Then it stopped. Completely. The silence that followed was worse than the sound, because I had the distinct feeling that whatever was inside had just noticed me. I turned and walked away. Not ran. Not yet. Just walked, trying to keep myself calm. Halfway back to the office, I heard something behind me. Footsteps. Heavy. Slow, crunching on gravel. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. I started walking again. The footsteps followed. I turned around quickly, shining my flashlight down the row. Nothing. No one. But the sound had been real. I was sure of it. I got back to the office and locked the door behind me. For the rest of the night, I didn't leave. I just sat there, watching the cameras, waiting for something to appear. At 4:27 a.m., one of the cameras flickered. The one facing Unit 47. When the image stabilized, the door was fully open. And there was something standing in the doorway. At first, I thought it was a person. Tall, thin, hunched slightly forward. But the longer I looked, the more wrong it seemed. Its arms were too long, hanging almost to the ground. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, like its neck couldn't support it properly. It wasn't moving, just standing there, facing the camera, facing me. I leaned closer to the screen, trying to make out details. That's when it moved. Not forward, not backward, just its head, slowly straightening. Then it stepped out of the unit. One step, then another. The way it moved didn't look human. Its limbs bent slightly too far, its posture shifting in ways that didn't make sense. I couldn't look away. It stopped directly in front of the camera. Then it leaned closer. So close that its face filled the entire screen. Except, there was no face. Just smooth, pale skin. No eyes. No mouth. No nose. And then the camera cut to static. I jumped back from the desk, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to get out. But before I could move, I heard something. Right outside the office door. A slow, dragging sound, followed by a soft knock, 3 times. I didn't breathe. Another knock, 3 more. Then a pause. And then, a voice. My voice. Open the door. I felt my stomach drop. It sounded exactly like me. Same tone, same pitch. Open the door, it repeated, slightly louder this time. I backed away slowly, shaking my head even though it couldn't see me. The handle on the door twitched. Once, twice. Then it started turning. Slowly. Like something on the other side was figuring out how it worked. I ran. Out the back of the office, through the emergency exit, not even thinking about locking anything. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I left everything behind. The keys, my bag, the job. I never went back. A few days later, I got a call from Paul. He sounded different, quieter. He asked why I had left without saying anything. I told him everything. About Unit 47, about the thing, about the voice. There was a long silence on the other end. Then he said something that still bothers me. You weren't supposed to hear it. I asked him what he meant, but he didn't explain. He just told me not to come back. A week later, I drove past the storage facility out of curiosity. It was closed, gates locked. No cars, no lights. But as I slowed down, I noticed something at the far end of the property. One unit door was open, just slightly, and even from the road, I could tell. It was Unit 47. I didn't stop. But sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, I hear something outside my apartment door. A soft, dragging sound, followed by 3 slow knocks, and a voice that sounds exactly like mine, telling me to open it. I had always been fascinated by abandoned places. Old hospitals, deserted schools, empty houses. There was something about them that drew me in, a quiet promise of mystery and discovery. So when I found the listing for an old boarding house on Hollow Street, I couldn't resist. It was tucked away at the end of a dead-end road, its brick walls worn with age, paint peeling, and windows clouded with years of grime. The sign outside read, "Vacancy." Though the building had been empty for decades, I called the number on the listing, and after a brief conversation with a voice that sounded tired and distant, I was given the key. The boarding house was larger than I expected, 3 stories tall, narrow, with a steep staircase that creaked under every step. The air smelled of damp wood, dust, and something else, something faintly metallic, like old blood. I had rented the place for the weekend, planning to explore, take photos, maybe write an article about it. I was alone. My friends had tried to warn me not to go, but I brushed it off. I wasn't the type to scare easily. The first day was uneventful. I explored the first and second floors, taking pictures of the peeling wallpaper, broken furniture, and the remnants of lives long gone. The rooms were small, sparsely furnished, each with its own story etched into the walls and floors. I felt a thrill of excitement, a sense that the building was alive with its own history, whispering secrets I couldn't yet hear. That night, I stayed in a small room on the 3rd floor, the one furthest from the staircase. I had set up my sleeping bag, a flashlight, and my camera gear. Around midnight, I woke to a sound, a faint shuffling, like someone dragging their feet across the wooden floor. I froze, straining to listen. The sound was coming from down the hallway. I grabbed my flashlight and tiptoed toward the door. The hallway was dark, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the shadows. That's when I noticed it. The last room at the end of the corridor, room 12, which I hadn't explored yet. The door was slightly ajar, though I was certain I had closed it earlier. A faint glow emanated from within, a soft, flickering light, like candlelight. I hesitated. Something in the pit of my stomach told me not to go in. But curiosity, always my undoing, pushed me forward. I reached for the doorknob, and the temperature dropped suddenly, my breath visible in the cold air. I opened the door fully and stepped inside. The room was small, almost claustrophobic. The walls were lined with old photographs, all of the same person. A man, smiling in some, serious in others, always staring directly at the camera. There was a desk in the center, covered with papers, notebooks, and a single lit candle. The flickering light cast shadows that danced across the walls, and I could hear whispers. Low, indistinct murmurs that seemed to come from everywhere at once. As I stepped closer to the desk, I noticed something strange. The papers weren't just old, they were recent. Notes written in a shaky hand, dates from the past week, and sketches of the room I was standing in, drawn from multiple angles. One sketch caught my attention. It showed the room, me inside it, and a figure standing behind me, its face obscured in darkness. My stomach turned. I spun around, flashlight sweeping the room, but I was alone. I tried to leave, but the door slammed shut on its own. The whispers intensified, becoming voices, faint but unmistakable. Stay. Stay. Don't leave. Don't leave. The candle flickered violently, casting grotesque shadows that twisted across the walls, forming shapes that seemed almost human but horribly distorted. I backed away, my hands shaking, and tripped over a stack of notebooks. On the floor, I noticed something even more disturbing. Footprints, wet and dark, leading from the desk to the corner of the room. I hadn't seen anyone, and yet the footprints were fresh. The whispers grew louder, almost pleading now, and I could swear I felt a presence moving closer to me. I scrambled to the door and yanked at the handle. It wouldn't budge. The temperature dropped further, and I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. The shadows on the walls shifted again, and this time, I saw him. A man, tall and gaunt, standing just beyond the light of my flashlight. His eyes were hollow, black voids that seemed to pull the very air from the room. He didn't speak, but I felt his gaze pressing down on me, heavy and suffocating. Panic overtook me. I slammed my shoulder into the door once, twice, until it finally gave way. I tumbled into the hallway, gasping for air. The whispers didn't stop. They followed me, trailing down the corridor, echoing in the empty building. I ran down the staircase, my feet pounding against the wood, the shadows seeming to stretch after me, elongating unnaturally with every step. Outside, the street was empty and silent. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. As I started the engine, I looked back at the boarding house. The windows on the third floor flickered with light, and in one of them, I saw him, the man from room 12, staring directly at me, motionless, unblinking. My heart sank. I drove away without looking back, my hands gripping the wheel until my knuckles turned white. I haven't returned to Hollow Street since that night, and I never will. But the experience didn't end when I left. The whispers followed me. They appear in my dreams, calling my name, beckoning me to return. And sometimes, in the corner of my apartment, I catch a shadow moving just beyond my vision. I know that room 12 and the man who inhabits it will never let me go completely. I've tried telling people what happened. Friends, co-workers, even a paranormal forum online. No one believes me. They call it imagination, stress, a trick of the mind. But I know the truth. The building isn't abandoned. It's alive, feeding off fear, waiting for the next visitor, the next curious soul who can't resist looking into the last room on Hollow Street. And once it has you, it never lets go.